All right, welcome back to The Devil in Detail. I'm Eli.
I'm Ben, and it's our 58th very special double guest Pander Brother episode. Amazing!
Yes, oh my God. Okay, without further ado, let's just bring them in. They're here. They're waiting in the wings. Let's see. I'll just remove spotlight. It's just you, Ben. All right, it's all of us. Welcome, the Pander Brothers. All right. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Arnold and Jacob, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Pleasure. It's been great watching you guys dig into the book.
Oh man,
Yeah.
it's been so much fun, and like it really is such a fresh and like different view of Grendel than Hunter Rose. Christine Spar is just like this whole different breezy world, and we're about to dive into Brian Lee Sung again, another whole different thing. So let's start. I don't want to do the let's start at the beginning thing that every podcast does, but let's start at the beginning here. No, we do know that
1985 or whatever. Yeah.
we do know that your father is like an amazing artist and a huge artist. So like,
thank you. Yes,
that's probably a great place to start. I mean, growing up in a household that was like very imbued with, you know, classic art, this amazing art, even a piece featured in one of the Grendel issues. So how did that first start your artistic creativity?
I mean, I think I would just say like right off the top, what it did was because our mom was an artist too.
Oh, okay.
And so growing up in that environment just somehow gave a kind of permission to do that and do it in a serious level, you know, as opposed to like, oh, why don't you do something practical? I mean, we were just in an environment where art making was really daily life. And so it just kind of completely rubbed off. And then, of course, our dad being a very classically trained, you know, doing highly complex perspective drawings and paintings and also very theatrical. He was involved in kind of underground alternative theater here in Portland in the 70s called the Storefront Actors Theater, and he did a lot of set design. So we kind of grew up in that space too. So there was a lot of exposure to characters, you know, interesting people and environments. So I think all that stuff just created this stew in which we were kind of, you know,
and just watching his the kind of his discipline. I think that you know, those things that kind of get normalized, like just, you know, watching someone just spend hours on hand lettering, you know, for a rock poster, you know, and so and then just to get, like Jacob said, this sort of getting up every day and just it was everyday life. So we just got used to sort of this, very unique kind of world at a very young age. And, you know, then you sort of come of age and you go, well, the world's actually a lot different. It's a lot rougher, you know, but so we were lucky to have those influences from both our parents.
When we saw your father's painting looked like it was photocopied in Argent's office, we were like, there's got to be a story here. And then beyond that, we're just like, what are we looking at? And
I mean, his work is really, just on a level that's hard to even describe. I mean, you know, classically trained in you know, from Amsterdam, that's where we were born as well. But that, you know, the Dutch Academy and those really classical influences, but also then coming to America. He came to America in the 60s, right in the middle of like, you know, the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, and so all this conflict. So there was a lot of very dark imagery that he was creating that was really responding to the time. And he's still doing, you know, he's still alive. Our mom is gone, but he actually just did a whole series of works, you know, around the protests we were having here in the, you know, last summer, and just big oil paintings, you know, around that subject. So he's very much a kind of a sponge to whatever's happening in the world, and that kind of feeds him. And you know, for us as well, I mean, we've definitely, you know, tried to keep our work sort of current, you know, in terms of the tone of the day, you know, the themes of our time.
With all these like heavy topics and heavy art and fine art, how did you find your way into comics, and were comics ever like like the low form of art in the household or anything? Or
Well,
We're still doing it, so
true.
no, I think though you touched it, it's kind of all of the above on different levels. Our mom and our dad, separated when we were really young, and so we grew up with our mom, and then we would come and visit our dad, and so the life with our mom was really super supportive in terms of our creativity, but it was really very much giving us that classic boyhood and watching Batman and Star Trek and Godzilla movies and all that stuff, and then and reading comic books, and devouring comics as Marvel all the way back to even like Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon. You'll see the kind of the cityscapes that he did in those. You'll see them in Grendel, even the very last page is kind
You mean Funky Town?
Funky Town. Yeah, it's a mashup between Alex Raymond and R. Crumb. So,
Okay.
But
Will Eisner in there too. I would say
Eisner
had definitely an influence on those sort of urban settings.
Yeah.
But,
so we kind of had both worlds. We had the kind of real American pop culture world that we were growing up in one space, and then we had this fine art, the smell of oil painting and linseed oil, and kind of avant-garde theater in another environment that we kind of hung out in, and so those two kind of mashed up in a way.
Awesome. That's a really interesting balance. When we were looking at other works, later on stuff, we looked at Girl Fiend and Secret. What's the only one called? Secret Broadcast. That sense of fun is really there. Things moving quickly and just like pulp adventure, rock and roll, and feeling good even when you're feeling bad.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that kind of growing up in kind of punk rock, post-punk, and then sort of really just evolving with pop culture and having this outlet, this incredible outlet through comic books. And that, that's one of the reasons I think we just kept doing it, was we just kept having access to express ourselves. And as things were changing in kind of real time, because we started young. Grendel has a lot of that sort of MTV 80s, but we weren't doing it ironically. We were in it. We were kids. I mean, I was about 17, 18 when we started the book. And then, so we were just fresh off the Duran Duran videos and, all that stuff. So we were pretty like motivated. We, and then, as it sort of, as time, hip hop and trip hop, all that electronic music influenced stuff like Secret Broadcast, sort of DJ culture.
And now we kind of got exposed to when we were originally doing Triple X. We were living in Amsterdam. This was kind of late 80s,
yeah,
89,
89.
And there was a pirate radio station out there, and they were playing all the really early like Chicago house and acid music, and we'd never heard that stuff, and they were just eating it up out there. And so we got kind of deeply did the deep dive just sonically into that stuff, which was kind of what it was the soundtrack we were drawing to at the time when we were living there.
Industrial music was kind of morphing into electronic music in a way, in a kind of organic way. It's a really amazing, vibrant time to be suddenly in Europe, and when house music was kind of having its breakout moment, and we were sort of bearing witness to these scenes at these clubs, and it was just like insanely new and very like upbeat, because the US was sort of in this extended dark, at least it depends on where you were, I guess, where you're standing, but it was an edgier kind of vibe, and so whereas you go to Europe and everybody's like woohoo, so we were like, oh, this is fun, but so those things immediately found their way, they found their way into Triple X, they found their way into, and then eventually we did one dedicated to pirate radio.
Oh, I love that. For me, the fusion of music and comics is like everything. I love that so much. This is a good place to plug the the Ween zine, and our mutual friend, shout out Gordon Walker, who
Yeah.
kind of
Awesome.
connected us at first.
Yeah.
That's wild, you know.
That's right. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, one of the buildings in Grendel, in a couple of the panels was Gordon's old apartment.
Whoa! Oh my god!
I don't even remember which one were you talking about.
It's the one where I think it's the one where the what's his name gets like the fork through his neck.
Oh right.
Climbs up on that like fire escape to go. That's Gordon's.
Oh right.
The shark.
Yeah, we were definitely using real places when we could. I mean, we were kind of making Portland look like New York, I guess. But you know, they're kind of on a parallel, I guess.
A lot of old brick buildings here and fire escapes. So
like in these scenes here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Flipped right to it.
Right. Wow.
All right. Shout out Gordon.
Shout out to Gordon.
That's one awesome. Of the things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about and watching your careers and interviews and print and video and otherwise is like the bond that you guys have. It's like you might as well be twins. And though you have solo works in comics and in other fields, it seems like the vast majority of the last several decades has been deeply collaborative. Can you guys talk about that from the beginning and how that evolved? And it just seems like two bodies, one brain a lot of times.
And the lines are blurred between
which one's left, which one's right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I can pipe in on that, I guess. I mean, you know, Jacob alluded to it a little bit with the, you know, having, you know, kind of growing up with single parents, and, you know, dad was sort of, you know, in a lot of we were in Eugene, which is just outside of Portland, about 100 miles. So we would kind of, you know, these visits. And so, you know, we really just kind of, you know, had each other. And, you know, so we're a couple of years apart, 2.5 years. And so we would just kind of, you know, look out for each other, or maybe Jacob looked out for me because I was the younger one. But that kind of spirit of just like, you know, getting into good trouble, I guess, you know, like, you know, drawing the comics, or, you know, Jacob had like these little Super 8 cameras, and we would go and just like, you know, get friends, and we'd go film little scenes out in the woods, and like with like swords and stuff, you know. And Star Wars had just come out in like 77, so of course we're completely like, minds were blown as kids, and we're just doing everything. We kind of took over. They have this thing called the EMU, which is like the study hall in Eugene, and it just looked kind of enough like the Death Star, you know, that we would like be running around filming like scenes in the EMU until security would kick us out, you know. So that was the kind of stuff we were just doing.
Like 13 and 14 or like that.
Yeah, we were at that. You know, we were just kids. So we were just like kind of entertaining ourselves. I think the comic books really, the funny thing was it was always there. We were reading them. We weren't really drawing them. I started to a little bit. And Jacob always just had this incredible ability to draw extremely, you know, extremely well, figuratively, and would do these, you know, beautiful women until, you know, the teacher would get mad. But we still have some of these amazing drawings of Jacob, these pencil drawings that he was doing at age 12 that were like, you know, insane. Anyway, and then, you know, then we just kind of like, but it was just kind of there. It was just another thing we did. And I think it wasn't until we kind of, you know, moved to Portland, living with our dad, and we sort of, I think
we started doing
creative
comics for our school newspaper.
Yeah.
So we started collaborating on these comic books that we were writing. So one of them was this thing called Gamma World, which is like, you know, post-apocalyptic, you know, adventure thing, mutants and, you know, dystopian Earth. And then Arnold had this concept for this kind of like awesome, like space vixen agent character. So we were doing these like short comics, but then we would draw these things, and one panel would be like Arnold would just put all this work into one panel, or I might put the work into other panel, and then we'd like sign the panels separately. Like, this panel was drawn by this brother and this one, and it just kind of seemed like really silly, like what the heck, you know. And then and I don't know when, maybe it was like we got
We
I
did
don't
a
know if
big
it's in a
drawing
comic
or
book
something.
or like, or if it was in a rock poster or doing some poster, but we just was like, why don't we just call it Pander Brothers? And that way we don't have to fight over, you know, who's got their name first or whatever. And that's kind of how that evolved. And then drawing wise, like Arnold was saying, I was, you know, early on getting into this figure drawings, but once Arnold kind of latched on to figure drawing, he just really kind of exploded. He really excelled in not just the kind of, you know, kind of the finishing and the form of the human body, but really in the expressiveness of the human body, a hand gesture, a facial expression, like all of the kind of animated qualities of a human body, he just somehow kind of had this knack for. So when we were drawing, and especially after we got the Grendel job, it kind of came down to like, well, these are these hardcore deadlines. How do we start to delineate this? And I had started to become a little more. I just started getting into drawing perspective. I had this teacher in grade school, and he kind of turned me on to, you know, 1 and 2 point perspective, and I kind of latched onto it and started to really excel in that. And so that just kind of made us gravitate on terms of like the finishing art in the books of me doing the environments and Arnold doing the figures. And it would kind of bleed over every once in a while, like in some of the books, like Exquisite Corpse, I drew some of the characters just so we kind of threw in a little more, you know, the weird twisted underground characters I would kind of draw. But it kind of just, we found that the way to collaborate was to kind of find our strengths and work off those to do this kind of meld. And it works in the writing as well. We kind of have I think I'm like more in I lean in the logic direction, and Arnold is really more into the kind of the heart and expressive kind of intuitive space. And so when we're writing, I might be more of the kind of plotting and structural writer, and Arnold tends to do certainly the first major passes at the dialogue, and then I'll come in and do my editorial on that and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I think it's because we're different enough. We have this very similar sensibility, but we're different enough in terms of where our strengths lie that's able to kind of flow the way it does.
It sounds like you're both able to steer each other towards flow when you find a little bit of blockage, which is
generally that.
Yeah,
and it's
cool.
also kind of after a while, you're like, you kind of put ego aside, and it's like, we got to get this done, so we got to make a choice. So things refine over time.
I think the one area where we would have like the most sort of debate would be like screen direction.
Yeah, that was a weird one. We discovered that we kind of would always perceive things in the opposite orientation. So that maybe that speaks to the left brain, right brain thing going on too.
Interesting.
So
We can analyze that for hours. Anyway.
Is one of you left-handed and the other right?
No.
I think it's just more I really don't know. That's just how the brain works. But we do tend to be, like Jacob said, there's a little bit more, order and chaos, kind of finding a balance that way. And that does, and the practicality. And I think in terms of just finding kind of a methodology, but in terms of which, I think Benjamin alluded to earlier, was the concept of being, the individuality, the idea of kind of, maintaining the individuality. And I think after we did Dissident X or Triple X, Dissident X, now Dissident X, we needed a break. We actually needed to break from each other creatively. I think that, we've been doing from Grendel to that, that Triple X, which actually took a very long time, longer than we had intended. And then Secret Broadcast was I kind of took the lead on that a bit, but still, it was a Pander Brothers book. But we were starting to do things, Jacob was focusing more on film projects, and I was kind of focusing, as a result of Secret Broadcast, more on music. I started executive producing another electronica record, and just and started DJing and kind of was thinking, well, maybe that's an area I'd like to evolve into career-wise, working for a record label and discovering new artists and so on. So there were these kind of career, I think, things that we were intending to do when we were younger. I had machinations of going to, school at like Parsons or FIT and really focusing on fashion, and Jacob, going to film school. And then Grendel kind of changed everything. I mean, that sort of kind of just landed at this time where we were right on the kind of at a fork in the road, if you will, in terms of where we were going to, take our careers. And we weren't planning on, we were doing the Pander Brothers, in Portland prior to Grendel, just we had a little studio. We were doing posters and graphics and hand lettering for, this is pre-Photoshop. So there wasn't, this was still like, old school T-square and triangle, if you will. Yeah. And so that was how we were getting by. And then so we were living, it was pretty close to the margins kind of lifestyle. So we knew we had to make a plan, and we were starting to move toward film, and I was moving into fashion and more serious illustration work that had nothing to do with comics. But what was interesting is the timing of Grendel was such that that opportunity came about. I'd actually been working at a comic store a few years earlier, and I quit that job. But would pop in there once in a while. I think I still had a box, and I'd had art on the wall, some of these characters of our own and some Marvel characters, and just drawings that were on consignment. And then I think we had some of our first published work that we did for a local writer who had a little kind of self-published book that he'd hired us to do illustrations in. And then that book was at the same comic store. So Matt came through there, and got to give Future Dreams props. That's the store here in town called Future Dreams. And Matt came to Portland, and I think was promoting Mage at the time, and was looking for kind of, seeking new artist to do this vision of Grendel with Christine Spar. And I actually owned a copy. I had a copy of Grendel, I think #2, the black and white, that I had bought when I was still working at the comic store. So I was familiar with the character. Nice. But then, we were already, and so there was this opportunity to try out for it and do some sample pages. Yeah. And this is the origin story, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Perfect segue. Yeah.
You'd seen the I had this character called Carla. Now she's called Starla, but so these, and they were drawings we did together, because I think we were doing the airbrush. They were a little more elaborate. We were getting more ambitious with our technique at the time. So we were doing the Prismacolor with the airbrush and all that. So those were hanging up. I guess he saw those maybe. Anyway, but I think that the stuff in the book, was the printed book, was very pulp. It probably fit the style.
Very noir kind of pen and ink, black and white. Yeah.
But still incorporates like the fashion and the style and the music feel, like that, what you were getting into or wanting.
Yeah, exactly. So really the timing was amazing, because we were thinking about making movies and writing scripts, and we were very, and our studio at the time was like, covered in like pictures from Interview magazine, and it was just a huge collage of kind of New York fashion and design and some comic book stuff, but mostly like we were moving into this more, cinema, images of Isabella Rossellini from Blue Velvet. I mean, just stuff that was very much in the kind of zeitgeist of young people at that time. And we were so comics in a way were like in our DNA at that point, but we were kind of already moving psychologically onward to something utterly unknown. And so when Grendel suddenly happened, because we drew the sample pages to the hilt. I mean, we were just like, so we got the job, because we were like, let's just say we'd been warmed up. we were hungry. And so those really popped. And I guess that was kind of it. And Jay Geldof inked a couple of the pages, and I mean, hands down, he was just so tight. It was so tight, so clean. Yeah. We were still kind of figuring it out on the inking side. We were still using Kohinoor pens and Zipatone, and that more the graphic art tools, not illustrated novel tools. So that was it was a no-brainer with Jay, even though we were kind of like young and we wanted to do it all, and and we did eventually kind of push to ink our own work, which is its own story. But yeah, I think all those pop culture elements, those influences, just found their way immediately into the artwork. And like I said, we were kind of our time, so we were just excited and having fun, really, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
I mean, it shows for sure. So you guys are like 19, 20, late teens, early 20s. You get this big book, how is it affecting your lives? And then how is your like lifestyle at this point going? Like,
Well,
back then.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about this, so Kamiko was really smart because they knew that, if a comic is late, it can die, right? Like it's got to have these things come out on time. And they were a young company and they wanted to succeed and they were smart. And so what they did is they went, let's get a bunch of these drawn. And one of the reasons they didn't want us to ink it is because they didn't want us to slow down. They wanted to really produce this in a kind of organized way that they could assure to hit those deadlines. And so consequently, they ended up really we drew a lot before the book was published. Wow. So we were just drawing, going about our business and being like, this is cool. All right, what about this? And we were just like really outside of any context of the impact of the book. We started getting paid.
Number 7.
Huh?
I think we drew up until number 7.
Oh, wow.
I think so, yeah.
Before it started coming out.
So, right. So, and now we're about, they were giving us a month to pencil an issue. And so that's, so 6-7 months in. And what was nice is that, up until then, we'd been freelancing, doing rock posters and this. So it was actually our first really nice kind of consistent income. So we were able to, draw, pay for rent for our little studio in downtown Portland, and even, fly to Amsterdam, which was kind of around that month 7 or something. We flew to Amsterdam, and then we came back. And I think it was while we were in Amsterdam in 1986, I think it was October, that the book came out. And we came back and the book was out, and we went into Future Dreams bookstore. And that's where we kind of discovered that this book was like really taking off. And because we had no idea, we hear the book's out, let's go see our book in print, that'll be exciting. Just thinking it's like cool, another thing, or not another thing, but just like it's just in print. Like that was the payoff for us. And then we discovered that it was like selling out, and that was just, and then from there things shifted.
Yeah. I mean, we walked in, I remember that, just to kind of relive that moment. It was funny because we came back, we'd probably been back a few days or something, and then we were like, we should go into the comic store and see but the book is out, number 1. And so we go into the comic store where I used to work, the Future Dream store, and walked in, and this is a place where occasionally I'd go in and they'd be like, oh, hey, how's it going, and all of a sudden just the whole mood was just totally different, with like, it was, and so we were, and I was like, hey, we're just curious. And the owner, there, the guys, the kid that worked there, they were just like, so what's happening, right? And we're like, oh, well, the book is like huge, it's a huge hit, right? And we were like, oh, okay, cool. So, for us, it was just, we didn't even have a context for that. Like, I think now people are savvier to, like, if something's a hit, you're suddenly on social media and you're doing the thing, you're already thinking people have that goal in mind. For us,
the immediate knowledge, right? Then it was very like,
everything was word of mouth. So so even the idea, and I think it's, I kind of miss that era of word of mouth, because it was like, it's like, quality, the quality of that people are really like, kids are going, you got to read this. And I think one of my favorite memories of that time was walking downtown, maybe, I don't know, I know it was 6 months in, because it was number 6. I remember walking in downtown Portland, kind of grungy, outside the video game parlor, and there were these 2 kind of punk new wave kids reading Grendel number 6.
Oh man.
And walking past and just kept going, but it was just like, yes, that's what you want, you want that level of, and they were just pouring over it. They were just totally like in it. And I just remember that vividly.
That's awesome.
but that was kind of, and I think that magic is still there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that magic is fully happening, where it's just happening in a different way now. But
do you remember, like, was there a time when like you guys were with Matt and there was like a party and there was like some wild times that you shared with Matt, or like a rock and roll type of feel that when you guys were like at the peak of it?
I guess the first Comic-Con that we were flown down to, which was pretty wild. Well, there was the one that we were crazy. We did the WonderCon, but I don't think Matt was at that. But we were on a plane that got hit by lightning with what's his name from Spawn,
Todd McFarlane.
With Todd McFarlane.
Oh my gosh!
There was a moment where whatever we all came close to meeting. But no, we went down to San Diego. That I think it was '87, and that was where we met everybody, because everything up until that point they were all on the East Coast.
Right.
Yeah,
in Pennsylvania, everyone was.
Diana, Bob.
It was all just phone calls, and we actually had little to no contact with Matt that I can recall. It was all pretty much through Bob and through Diana and Bob Shrek, and we were kind of just like Jacob said, we were just trying to meet deadlines. So so it was cool to meet Matt. I know we talked to Matt a couple times about in the early stage in the kind of creating the world and stuff, but he really just let us go, and which was amazing, and really we got to tip our hat to Matt's sort of allowance to go nutso on his character because we were sort of unbridled, and they did rein us in a bit, but we were he gave us a lot of latitude, and obviously number 9 was where he really let us go. But in terms of that first meeting, it was, I think there was just a general sense of like, I think there was just a buzz in the air. Again, the book hadn't come out yet. Number 1 hadn't come out yet. I think was that August or July, I guess. So we were still a few months out so no one really knew, but I think they had a feeling, but they weren't really letting us know. And Matt was kind of like, we were just kids, so we were like, I think we went and hung out with hung out with Tim. I'm sorry, I'm having like an
it was kind of fun. We were hanging out with Bill Mooney.
That was later.
It? I thought that was the same convention.
That was without. I don't think that was without. But we were hanging out. Who's the guy who did Cerebus? I'm sorry.
I thought that was the same. I thought that was the same thing.
No, it was the same convention, but that was like, we met those guys at a different party or something. But it was like that. It was like meeting your heroes, But the other, Yak, I got to mention this story, is that in that same afternoon, that first day there, we also met Dave Stevens, and he was that was when I started kind of nerding out, like, oh my God, Dave Stevens, and he was young, maybe had less than 10 years on us. I mean, he was in his late 20s or early 30s at that time. But, he'd been doing The Rocketeer, and I was just like, so he was a real kind of mentor in a way, because he kind of went, he came, I think we had just drawn the cover for number 4.
I think we brought that with us. We delivered it to Kamiko right there at the convention, and Dave saw the pencil drawing.
We showed it to him. So we just did, because he was like, I love you guys. He was like, some of the, I'm not, he said, I love your pencils. You should, this, he was kind of like, I don't want to speak for him, but he was really feeling like our inks, or the pencils needed to be inked in a different way. And so at the time, so we were like, well, he said, you guys should be inking your own work with a brush. And I was like, and we showed him the cover to number 4, and he was like, oh, he said, you're not going to ink this? And we're like, well, we're not the inkers, we're not. And so anyway, he went and walked over, I think, to Diana. He said, I'll be right back. And he walks over to Diana, and they have a little aside. And he comes back and he goes, I'm inking that cover. I got you. And we were like, what? Next thing you know, it's like this incredible.
So awesome.
I mean, that's the stuff that you just can't. It's like lightning in
But
a
he
bottle.
did it. He did it. He said that he wanted to show us what it would look like with a brush. Like he was like, this is what this could look like if you guys do it with a brush and figure that out. And so it really was a great moment that did,
Oh, I started
influence our
in the same
direction.
brushes, and just and really there wasn't a lot of time to practice, because then we were sort of like, hey, can we ink this, number 7, the big action issue, and and you saw those inks were very, they were thick. they were not Dave Stevens lines whatsoever, but it was that, that intention to figure out how to master the brush.
Yeah, when we would look at those, the 3.5 issues that you guys had done, what we called it, like shrink wrapped latex. Like it's very, just like the texture is like very stretched over the forms,
So
and you can
cool.
really see
It
things.
was, there wasn't a whole lot of, I'd love to say, yeah, that was all the big plan. It was sort of like, oh, that's looking cool. Okay, we'll just keep doing that. And in hindsight, sometimes lately I've been like, and I'm sure Jay will just roll his eyes, but I just would, in hindsight go, wouldn't it have been cool if the whole book had just been inked by Jay, that the whole thing had just been
consistent.
And I kind of, but when you're young and we're pushing for this, and and I think once Rich Rankin had inked that book, it kind of opened this doorway. We kind of, that sort of gave us this ability to push a door open and go, we want to ink. And it was at the time just what we weren't looking at it holistically. We were in the moment. When you're young, you do that. You're just, so, but in hindsight, yeah, that I feel like in terms of a vision, seeing that, staying in, maybe number 9 would be an exception, but still like staying in that lane,
Yeah.
But that's the past.
Yeah, but we wouldn't have gotten to that issue number 9 had we not gone through those other issues.
Steps.
So it's just everything is, it flows the way it flows.
It flows the way it flows. And and Matt, I don't know, even, it'd be interesting. That would be my question to Matt if he were here, would be like, how far had you planned these stories? Because we hadn't really, I kind of feel like I know for a fact, you can just tell we were vibing off of each other. And I think that's one of the cool things about the collaboration is it seemed like he was letting it happen because good things, it was getting him creatively, maybe it was even inspiring things that he didn't plan on. And so, but I don't even know how. It would be interesting to know with number 9, because that did sort of come out of left field. We never knew what to expect. But then after a while, we started to get a sense of obviously the trajectory of the story. But then when number 9, the script for that happened, we were just like, wow, okay,
Well, ironically, the one thing to kind of point out about it is that the cool and unique aspect of working with Matt versus, say, other writers, because it's like each writer kind of writes and delivers their script a little bit differently. And what was really unexpected and kind of cool was that Matt, he never sent us any dialogue. I mean, it was literally just, this is the scene. It's going to be 3 pages. The opening part of the scene, Christine is, feeling optimistic or whatever, and then Brian does something, and then at the end, they're angry with each other or something like that. There was just very broad ideas, and so then we would it left this ability to kind of create this theater of this expressions of these characters, but with no dialogue. It was all just kind of like a vibe of what the human body chemistry and the dynamics were. And then, months later, we wouldn't see the dialogue until the book was published. And so Matt was getting these pages, looking at those drawings, and then going, I think that's what, in this page, this is when we'll start this will be the dialogue there. But what I think is interesting about that is that the whole book was basically drawn like issue number 9 from book 1. Right. We were drawing kind of silent, dramatic scenes all the way through. So I don't know what he might have just seen that there was that kind of ability to storytell without words or whatnot, but I mean,
So
I've
was
never
there
thought of
special
that.
instruction for 9? Like, was it like, this is going to be no?
There was a
Yeah,
loose.
that's right. He did say, yeah, there's only going to be 2 pieces of dialogue in this book, and it's it's going to be this silent episode, and then I think, each scene was maybe like roughly a paragraph of describing what's happening in that set of 2 pages or 3 pages, kind of. Usually that's how it would be described, like this, 2-page scene, and then a kind of a really brief description of of what goes down action wise.
Oh, that's
That
so
silent theater description is great because I think it reminds me of kabuki theater, not
There you go.
Mhm.
which is thematically relevant to
Yeah.
what you're doing. Being
Well, you
like,
made an interesting point too, since as Benjamin, just I remember, I think it was you who we talked about Funky Town for a second. Go back to that.
oh yeah,
And how there was this. It kind of it made me take pause because it was you were observing that the world of the people in the background, these sort of freaks and characters that were inhabiting the world, that were kind of in this other almost societal kind of a place in society that
Yeah.
you felt that polarization. And it's true, she was really like, Christine was operating in this privileged world and in this elite world, and then there's this other world that's just kind of happening around us, and we were placing more emphasis or some emphasis on that and taking opportunities when we could. We were already, prior to Grendel, some of the stuff we were doing for like restaurants and advertisements were these kind of street scenes and like characters and fashionable people and weirdos and whatnot in some like urban scene already, but it might be like to sell tacos, or so it was kind of in our wheelhouse to be doing these echoing the times and drawing them all, but by putting it in this context of this character of Christine Spar and her world and the bubble she was in, that really did sort of echo also the times. And the times haven't changed that much. They've changed in a lot of ways, but we used to go in a very economically polarized society. And I think that was almost a subconscious thing that was happening. I don't know if we were conscious. We weren't making a political.
No, I don't think it was conscious. I just think it's like, there's so many things, like there's aspirational imagery. And I mean, fashion is often extremely aspirational, right? So you get these like super cool, idyllic images, or even like Patrick Nagel, which is kind of that era. But then you also get reality, the daily news and the streets that you actually walk down, and it's just,
raw
and somebody sleeping on the sidewalk. So, and you can't ignore that either. So these things, they're all part of the influence kind of pouring in. But, so I think for just the drawings, from the drawing side, it was drawing those characters was an opportunity to draw cool fashion and these kind of like people jetting around in flying cars and these kind of, upper societal characters or aspirational characters, and then set against that world that's you're kind of almost not full Blade Runner, but it has that
on the edge.
it's funny, being Eli and I are both born in '83, and so it's not a time capsule. It's a view back. For us, Keith Haring and Patrick Nagel, we got the vestiges of that stuff. There was like the early '90s had like a lot of post Haring imagery that was commodified for us on lenticular school supplies and
Right.
you know exactly what I'm talking about, Eli.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting,
Well, there was a real romantic side to, again, no internet. So everything, back then we bought magazines and actually there was even like in the art store, there was like, that's where we would get Interview magazine because that was the only place you could get it.
And Raw magazine.
Raw magazine was, they didn't have that at the comic store. That was where you'd buy that in some, specialty store, and we really didn't have many in Portland at that time. So Powell's was not what it is today. Back then it was much, it was just a different feel. It wasn't so pop culture, And so now, I mean, so at that point we would just, these things were rarefied and special. And so we were kind of, so something like a Keith Haring or a Patrick Nagel, they hadn't been turned into this, mass produced kind of,
it wasn't in all the salons yet.
No, it was still cool. It was still, like, ooh, that's sort of, like very New York. And I think Jacob went to New York in '83 for the first time on one of his first film, like you were a PA.
Like a production assistant on a project. And then we went into Manhattan, and it was still like old school Manhattan, like pre-Giuliani. I mean, it was like, looked like Taxi Driver. I mean, really just raw. And then there was like, we all wanted to go to the pop shop, go to Keith Haring's pop shop. So we found our way down there and went in there. And I think I bought like a cool, like silkscreen poster and a couple of Keith Haring buttons. And the whole interior of the store was just like Keith Haring, black and white, mural, top floor to ceiling with all this stuff in there. And that was great. It was just like that really, I don't know, it was just kind of like being right in the moment at that time. And so, yeah.
Like back then it was like there were these bright spots in all of this sort of mundane, it was just, everything was just status quo, and then you had these little hot spots. And that kind of were like, okay, those are where my people are. There's my tribe, and I think that sort of kind of grew out of the '80s and into the '90s. Really, the '90s is where maybe it started to get commodified and become really pop culture. But it was sort of Gen X, that germination of Gen X, I guess, where we were sort of exploring, discovering, and then we were lucky enough with Grendel to have a vehicle to sort of plug our version of it in, I guess, and be part of this conversation, this pop culture conversation that we didn't see coming. We just were like doing it pretty naturally. But that's kind of how it worked, back then. You were just seeking out new stuff, like new tape cassettes or like pirate radio, and we would make cassettes of that. We'd make, like, ooh, that's cool. We got to grab that. So it was very much like, discovery. And I think I don't think that has changed. I think there's just a lot more to weed through to get to the discovery now. And millennials and Gen Zers, I mean, they're the ones who are kind of mining for that. And they understand that language maybe more than what we, in our sort of analog version of that. But the spirit of that is still there. And I mean, that's probably why comics are still really relevant too, is that there's all these new voices.
Yeah, and looking back, like it still really does hold up and still really does, show us like kind of how Ben said, like a snapshot of like the 80s, but also a snapshot of like this future vision. And like, I guess like Ben and I didn't see it as it was coming out. We weren't there like as they were on the stand. So like, what was your experience? You told us like right when you first started coming out, but then what was your experience as it was coming out? And then your segue from like the Grendel artist to your next projects.
Well, do you want to take that? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, with it coming out, really what it did is it just really emboldened us. It empowered us and it kind of gave us a sense of like these dreams that we've had can be attained if we do the work. And it was a very incredible validator, I think. And so it really helped kind of minimize self-doubt and give us this boost of confidence to keep pushing forward on our creative path. So that was a big kind of fundamental part. And then I think quickly after Grendel, we get Ginger Fox kind of kicked in, and we were definitely.
Max Headroom was also kind of in there.
Headroom. So they were kind of they were trying to find something for us, figuring out how do we plug in what these guys just did into what's happening right now, in terms of like the writers they were getting. So, they had this project from Mike Barron, and they saw that it was like LA kind of fashion, pop culture. So that seemed to fit stylistically. And so we kind of took that on and pushed the style boundary even further, of kind of the cubism and breaking things out even more, deconstructing it. It was a kind of a little bit more of a kind of, not as cohesive, I think, a kind of a driven story plot structure. It was really more like a mad world kind of universe. So it was even more kind of open and free to interpret in a way.
Yeah. I think we had one of the characters, actually, we were like, how do we get her from the upstairs bedroom down into the living room? Because it was like these big jumps. And so we were like, well, why don't we just have her turn the page of the comic and then fall through the panel into the living room,
yeah, we were just like, yeah, but I think that really what ended up happening is in that trip to Holland in 1986, when we were just penciling Grendel, and that was also where even just being hired to do that gave us inspiration that we were on a particular path, that there was opportunity that was ahead. And at that age, you just think everything just keeps moving up. You don't think like, oh, there's valleys anywhere. You just are like, now the plane is taken off. And that got us just really jazzed about writing this adventure tale of kind of like a modern day or future forward Tintin, which eventually evolved into XXX/Dissident X. And it was at those comic conventions where we were doing those initial promos for Grendel and Ginger Fox that we pitched the spirit of that idea to Kimiko, and Bob Schreck got very excited about it, and that got us like fueled up to go even further and just keep developing the concept. And then those guys ended up moving to Dark Horse kind of in the interim. So, and then eventually we had developed it enough and we pitched it, and they decided to go for it. So that kind of we just got more and more wanting we wanted to write. We just wanted to kind of break the boundary or the barrier between you're just an artist and we're going to plug you in here, to being real auteur creators and writers. And so XXX/Dissident X really became that first effort. And from there it kind of flowed. But I think that was a big part of it, was just empowerment. Just that early success at a young age kind of helped kick our butts and tell us to keep going down that path and take the risk.
Collaboration going. I mean, it definitely was, these things were fueling themselves. So we weren't really thinking about solo stuff until obviously after the XXX book sort of came out. And by then it was like 94. And we were, Jacob definitely wanted to do more work on the film side of things and all that. And it was around the late 90s that we kind of really started to come back together and start writing screenplays, and eventually that would lead. And then I moved to LA, and we were doing more individual things, but it was a healthier balance. We had spent some time doing solo projects. And so when we came back together, like around, 2000, that sort of, I think, started a new collaborative chapter for us. And that's what led to projects like Batman City of Light, and us writing a screenplay. Well, we wrote The Girl Fiend as a screenplay, and we were pitching that, but it was during the whole Twilight thing. So it kind of got, it was just caught up in this milieu of vampire, projects that were in Hollywood. So we shelved it and then revisited it. But that was there was a lot of really inspired collaboration that started to happen in the early 2000s, but we needed that break. But and there were still projects that we were doing. Luckily, we did some stuff for Vertigo, and we were getting hired to do projects. But we were kind of burning out on our collaboration in the mid to late 90s. So we took a bit of a break, and I'd say since then we made a feature film. I mean, things just have kind of, the world changed and we changed and became adults, but the collaboration is a bit more of a I mean, we are a business. We are the Pander Brothers. It's our business.
Right.
But it's also in terms of the creative side, we pick and choose more, where we're going to devote that time, because time is, definitely more precious.
Yeah. And I think interestingly, a lot of the collaboration over the last, decade or so, or I mean, certainly from those 2000s, has been writing. The collaboration has been in a little more of an ephemeral and not as visible way, but we've done a ton of writing and, screenplay, kind of original content development. And so that's where we put a lot of our energy. And then of course, Girl Fiend was, that was kind of like, basically the interesting thing about Girl Fiend is that was made possible because we embraced the digital drawing technology. Because that's the other thing, is when Grendel was done, and even XXX originally, the publishers were actually advancing money against royalties. So effectively we were able to have an income that subsidized the drawing, the man hours involved in producing these works, which is quite a lot. And so when we did Girl Fiend, there was no advance at all, and that was for a 250 plus page book, which is economically not a sound thing to do. But we started working with there's digital tablets, digital technology, like maybe this can go faster. And we did discover that it went a lot faster. And it was also collaboratively really interesting because we were able to share these files and draw on top of each other's drawings, or even just like conceptualize on top of the drawings and then hand it back. And so the drawing collaboration became even more dynamic in that sense. So that space has really been a really cool environment and kind of mode to be collaborating in now. So that's kind of, I don't know, a little random, but writing and digital drawing is really where we've been kind of exploring our collaboration.
Definitely. Now, as you create new things and you're like making the films, do you find that since Grendel was like the first major big thing that you guys did, do you find yourself like thinking about that creative process to like inspire these new things? Do you think about choices that you made in the book? Like I always talk about the panel breaks and the shadow of the panel on the characters, like these type of creative like choices. Do you find, not that you're like going back to the well in a way, but that these creative choices that you made at the start are still like influencing the look and feel of and fashion of things?
Well, for me, I think it's to the degree that there's all these tropes, to use a trope. There's all these kinds of forms and not rules, but formal strategies of telling a story or drawing a composition. And for us, I think at the time we were just we were entertaining ourselves as we went. And so we were going, what can we do that's different? And not that it was like in a self-conscious way of like, we want to show the world something different. It was just like, how can we just mess this up, but do something different for ourselves and keep it exciting? Because it's like drawing day in, day out. So I think that is kind of one of the mantras is just, how can we make this fresh, different, exciting, even if it is like a classic tale of a vampire love story, that's the fun of it, is reinventing.
The other, I would just add to that the kind of innovation side of things that we're kind of connected, like Jacob said, to just like, how do we, entertain ourselves, but also let's push this. And there was a kind of I think for us coming into comics when we did, and knowing where, because we were Marvel kids and we were facing some of those rules. I remember I think there was something about like we had 2 exclamation points on a sound effect, and the letter was like, only, customarily only one. And we were like, what?
Okay.
I want
just sort of like we weren't intending to break rules, but there were these rules, these things like they become, the norm. They become a standard. And so to break those standards for us was just very natural, because it was like, well, this is how we see it. And so I think now it is, you know, and as you develop, and, you know, and I'd be the first to say that, you know, we were like keeping these editors kind of like, you know, probably on their toes a little, like, or just kind of like, what are these guys going to do next? And we were, if the book wasn't as successful, we might have even gotten fired. Who knows, you know, because we were pushing it. And, you know, and so as you develop, you also try to become more practical, like, okay, maybe do we need to do that? I mean, there are things that can make you start making more practical decisions. I know that with XXX, we consciously said, let's keep everything in the panels. Let's challenge ourselves to do that. I do remember.
Yeah, that was the radical thing for us to do at that point. To kind of contain ourselves, but we wanted to do it. We also wanted it to. We were riffing off the kind of Tintin format, you know, or like these are just
trying to make a kind of a rock and roll Tintin, but in terms of the you know, innovation again, like trying to come up with. I mean, I think Exquisite Corpse, although we didn't write it, Jerry Prosser wrote that. You know, that was a great challenge to do a non-linear story, and to kind of create a world where things were happening in these random orders, but they were all connected. That really
and do bringing a kind of mixed media elements, because what we would do is we do drawings, and then we would videotape the drawings with like a VHS, you know, recorder, and then photograph those off the TV screen.
Oh, whoa!
Have them, you know, then have them printed, and then lay them into the panel, so you'd see the characters' video POV, but it was a video POV of a drawing, so it stayed within the drawing world. But that, and then all those video covers. I mean, the covers were shot with a VHS camcorder, and then we pulled stills and created the compositions as a VHS, you know, shot essentially. And those were those wraparound covers. So we were always kind of playing, you know, with film and comic books as a kind of a weird like expression of each other. So we would find ways to do that. So like in the case of Exquisite Corpse, bringing this video universe into it, and then with Secret Broadcast, having it be even more multimedia, because it had a soundtrack, it had an actual music album, but then we created music videos that went with it. So we were always trying to, maybe there was just a desire to be also making movies at the same time. So we found ways to kind of reach into these other mediums to expand the comic book world. And then the internet happened. And, you know, so things like reissuing Secret Broadcast became really exciting, because it was like, now we can actually have all this content be accessible in one space, as opposed to, oh, you go to a comic book store and buy a comic. Now you got to go down to, you know, Everyday Music and buy a comp CD of the soundtrack, and then maybe watch MTV and see a video. You know, it was like everything was so disparate. And now with this new technology, it's kind of awesome, because you can kind of make these multimedia projects all tie together.
With that, we should plug maybe Fuse Comics is our digital imprint, where although our stuff, you know, a number of these projects are available on Comixology, you can also kind of experience kind of on a sort of a hub, if you will, the Secret Broadcast project. We actually did we updated all the music in around 2012 with new electronic music artists, including people like Meepy Manifesto and Howie B, some bigger names. So that really was cool to kind of, and we colored the book, added a couple pages to the ending, so it's got an extended ending. And those you can, you know, download. We have like Gumroad, so you can actually get it via Gumroad. And and Tasty Bullet is another one where, even though I did that with John Bank, and Jakob and I really collaborated heavily on this sort of the marketing of it, which we did a number of fake commercials and all this stuff that at the time we were trying to kind of almost do like kind of a Orson Welles sort of hoax, you know, around the whole thing of this drink that once existed in the 90s. So there's all these videos that we would plant on YouTube. We would send them to a friend in Europe, and then they would talk about it in Dutch. Like, remember this video from the 90s, you know, commercial, you know. So we were, I think we went through, I think for me, living in LA just got me on this whole branded thing, but
went down the rabbit hole.
We went down a rabbit hole with Tasty Bullet. So, but you can experience some of those videos, all that stuff on this. It's called fusecomics.com.
Okay. Nice. That'll be all in the comments for everyone watching.
I'm super curious about your storyboards, which I've assumed that you guys do elaborate, extensive storyboards. Can you talk about those and how what the need difference and who you're communicating to and what devices you bring in from comics or leave out, stuff like that?
On the film projects?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, like right now we're working on a project that is an original screenplay that has a fair amount of visual effects, VFX, and like those particular scenes we are front loading to storyboards so that we can kind of communicate that with VFX creators to get a sense, you know, communicate our ideas. So in certain things like that, we're really doing, I think, you know, thinking about it from the pacing and rhythmic structure of a film and the compositions, but also kind of the vision, the kind of almost like keyframe visions of the world building aspect of it, to communicate with other people that would be kind of doing some of that stuff. So there's that, which is pretty traditional, I guess, in that regard. And then
we've been storyboarding more than we would storyboard. Like, I actually would get hired to storyboard projects, and actually, you know, it's been a side job for like advertising and actually even some like new technology stuff. So that's very perfunctory. It's very like, you know, for focus groups and so on. But it did kind of get us more into the thinking of like, you know, we shouldn't assume that we're thinking the same thing, you know, and especially with a movie, you know, a bigger story like that, you know, it's good for us to be on the same page. And so I think now we're even more, you know, mindful of that when we are taking on a big project, that we sort of envision it, we kind of come together, because these things are very difficult to produce, these bigger types of projects like a movie. So you really have to have all your, you know, your pieces in place, and we as the creators can't be contradicting each other in terms of what that vision is and what those choices are. And so that I'd say that's more the practical side of it, more so than even a real creative side, but that it's working through the creative so that we can, you know, kind of keep it contained in a way, and like Jacob said, communicate it, articulate it well.
And I mean, I think that makes sense when you're doing films that are visually told. Not all films necessarily need storyboards, but I think the kinds of films that we're doing, or, you know, and working towards doing, storyboards make a lot of sense. And I think what's really nice is to have them printed up big and have them on set, and you can literally X them out as you go and you see the progress. So there is something really satisfying about that too. And then you don't, you know, the one big bummer is if you're in the editing room and there's like 2 shots that you didn't end up getting, and you're, you know, it's like, yeah, you want to make sure you get your shots. Get the shots.
When I talk to my students about it, I teach storyboarding, they will often say what you just said. This film doesn't really need storyboards. It's about people having coffee and, you know, their feelings and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I have to find some way to convince them that they do, even though,
well, I mean, you know, it's funny because I mean, I just shot this little short not long ago, kind of in the COVID short. So it was all just shot at my place with my family. But what was interesting, because I was in it and directing it, is like screen direction. So even though, well, actually I storyboarded the whole thing, but what it was really important was just the top down blocking. Just in terms of like a conversation stuff, you can still completely get lost in that, in terms of just eye line and all that stuff. So I actually think cursory storyboarding, even on conversation scenes, is great, because
to have that overhead view.
Yep, yeah, all of that. for
For
sure.
sure.
And you'll see where there's redundancy. I mean, where you'll want that, that detail, that cutaway of the porcelain figure on the, shelf staring at the argument, that those moments that you can kind of see ahead of time, so you're not relying on the moment to maybe grab B-roll. Like, you want to know, like, okay, I know I'm going to want to pepper this scene or fill it out and give it dimension with and point at the world that they're in while this is happening. And that not all films, and anybody could say, well, we don't need that, especially the line producer or first AD that's going, we got to get out of here. But like, we need this because we know what we're going to need in the editing room. And so I think that was something we learned too, especially editing our first feature, which was basically a lot of kind of doing a lot of new storytelling in the editing room, which took longer. So if you really have, can go in knowing kind of, what shots you want and have boarded some of them out. But then when you're in that environment, for one, you're working more efficiently. So you have the time to grab that B-roll. It's not as big of a deal. So there's a kind of a practical side to just having that at the ready. The other thing I would say to that point is that, talk about screen direction, like Jacob and I can usually go, okay, yeah, let's flip that or whatever. But we have we're sort of seeing things in a similar way. But when you talk about like the cinematographer or all these other cooks that kind of can get in the kitchen in those environments where you've got a lot of big personalities, a lot of things happening quickly. And so the vision can kind of get muddled by other forces that you don't always expect.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the one of the best ways to ensure that your vision it comes through and translates through all the different keys and everything is to storyboard.
Yeah. You can always go, everybody stop, let's refer to the storyboards. And I would say that's one of the best arguments for a film student is like, if you want to keep the reins on your project, be able to go back to the Bible, and everybody's like, okay, I see, yes, and then they can formulate their argument from that point. But if you don't have,
well, I've even heard things of like, well, like on a set where it's like, you don't need that. Like people, you go, well, we're running out of time, we got to shave shots, and then it's like, you don't need that shot. And in the editing room, it's like, it's a key shot. But on the set, it seems really like, not, it's like kind of random. And we actually, when we did our feature film, we ended up doing, we had a 2-day pickup shoot like 2 months afterwards, because after we had done the first assembly of the whole film, we were like, all these little inserts that we really need to move this thing along. And we went back and did them. But, so anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole here.
Well, what was your
film? That's what we
yeah.
do here.
Yeah. What was your film? Tell us about your film.
We did we did an indie feature about, we shot it in 2007, called Selfless, and it was a psychological kind of existential thriller about a self-absorbed architect who gets his identity stolen, and he's so wrapped up in his kind of career and his ambitions that he slowly starts losing his sense of self. And so it's very much in a kind of like Hitchcockian, wrong man at the wrong place kind of thing.
Like his whole world is just basically being slowly taken apart, by this nefarious character in the web, and our protagonist, who's a flawed individual. It's a bit of a study in hubris. It's a cautionary tale in that regard, and so he doesn't see it coming until his whole world is like basically falling apart, and he doesn't have a safety net, and his, like Jacob said, his sense of who he is so wrapped up in his career that when he becomes he becomes nobody in a way. And that it kind of spoke a bit to how we're sort of wrapped up now, in our own self-identity, especially now with social media and the idea of being your own brand. And so these kind of like ideas were floating around the idea of a kind of a modern man in this, sort of self-absorbed society. So that was it. But we got a deal with E1. We took it through the festivals and actually premiered it at Comic-Con in 2010, I believe, or 9, and E1 picked it up. And but then then we basically, unfortunately, we signed a deal that gave them a lot more latitude than we realized. So
let's just say the devil is in the detail.
Right.
Yes.
You have the last word on that. Yeah. So
can it be viewed? Can we see it still, or is that part of the?
It's not available for streaming, although it has had a number of national VOD runs through cable. But currently it's not available for streaming. We can send out a private link, of course, but so that's why we're just kind of like on to the next. Let's get another movie made. Let's keep on trucking, and then hopefully.
And you're working on, is that what you guys are working on now? Then is the next film?
No, that's a film we did a while back, and then we've got a new film that we're that's written, and we're in the early stages of kind of putting together a whole business plan and start to.
Nice.
We have a book due to Dark Horse that hasn't been announced yet, but we're working on getting that delivered by end of August of the
very cool.
And for 2022 release. So that'll be announced either later this year or early next year. But
is that written and drawn by you guys, or?
This will be a full Pander Brothers book, and probably, I guess we could say, we could reveal that it'll be in the kind of 60 to 80 page kind of. It'll be a mini graphic novel. But that's all I should say about it. And then then that's when we're gonna once that's delivered, we'll be able to really shift our full focus onto this film project that we were we wanted to do prior to COVID kicking in. Obviously, a lot of things got pushed for everybody. We're going to be focusing on energy on that.
You guys were so into film. Were you even into film back in the Christine days? And was there ever any talk someone spoke to you about?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Turning Christine into a film?
Oh well, it's Matt's character.
True, yeah.
We designed the look of Christine, but that's something that's sort of in that. I'd really be a question for Matt. I mean, we've heard our kind of through the grapevine stuff about it, but he'd be the better one to respond to that.
That just would have been so cool, even
it would have been
the time.
Cool.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
It would have been great. Yeah,
I think there's other things that like you were talking about how you were, unintentional or unconsciously influenced by it, but there were so many things that came out that I even heard you guys referring to things that were that would come after the book, and I was like, well, we weren't influenced by that because it hadn't come out yet. But cool. That's everybody, and we were living in San Francisco at one point, and we actually had a meeting at the studio of the people that did Aeon Flux, the animation studio. Wow. But it was one of those weird things where we got there and no one was maybe it was a Friday, everyone had left, and then or they'd made other plans. So we were this empty studio, but I remember the guy going, there was a lot of people here that were really into Grendel, and I think they'd be bummed to know you guys showed up, but they weren't here. And so I was that's too bad, because Aeon Flux is another one of those weird comparisons we would always get. We still do, but that came after Grendel and was, again, we were utterly, totally disconnected from it. But but it's a small world. We're kind of, feeding off each other. I mean, we're sponges for all sorts of stuff that showed up in the comics. So, even though you say it's influenced by us, who knows what we were influenced by? It's a sort of conduit.
Yeah, well, it's a creative conversation. I mean, in that regard, absolutely. It's you're constantly, it's call response to all of your, heroes and influences.
So those are just kind of things you reflect upon. But I mean, obviously, we have our own characters that we've created, like Girl Fiend, that obviously we'd like to see turned into a movie or an original series. Dissident X would be great. Tasty Bullet would be great. These would all be awesome vehicles, but you just got to pick your battles. And I spent a lot of time in LA pitching our stuff as in and ended up coming back and going, let's make a movie, because if you're not positioned right for that, you can spend a lot of time shopping ideas instead of creating ideas, and
you lose the steam that you could have been using for the creative process.
It can break the spirit, you bet. And you got to keep your head on straight and find those vehicles that turn you on and keep you inspired, because there are peaks and valleys, and we got a big peak right out of the gate. And I don't think we've ever been, maybe there were times where we were trying to regain some of that, but I think for us now, it's like, that was so special and so unique. Even if you were to implement similar methodologies or whatever, it would never be the same. And everything is, that's the beauty of it. You just keep looking forward. And when you do look back, hopefully learn from it and maybe, tap into some of it, you bet, but it is about kind of just, that's the beauty of it, the unknown of what, we don't know. I never want to go to a psychic or get the crystal ball.
You don't want to know.
I don't want to know,
Yeah. But I would say that, it is the creating that begets, more creating, in the sense that Matt was in that comic book store and he saw drawings on the wall and a little zine that we did illustrations for. And so those efforts planted seeds that we had no idea about. So I think it's just, the whole idea is to just keep making stuff, no matter how grand or how modest, and putting it out there, because those are the things, that is the commodity. You can tell people ideas, but everybody's got an idea, but it's the physical thing that creates the traction. So that's why we just, did draw a 200-page graphic novel for no pay, because we were like, we believe in this story, and whether it's a feature film or a comic book, we were like, this is a fun script, we want it to be in the world. And I'm really glad we did it. It was great, and it just kind of keeps moving things forward. So keep on creating.
Yes, that's the moral of this story, man. And that's what I always propose to, because that's what I do, is you just keep making, you just keep creating, keep putting it out there. You never know who's going to see it. You never know who it's going to hit in that right way. And even if it doesn't create an opportunity for you, perhaps you, in creating that, created an opportunity for someone else to meet their potential and like make it going and
inspire
make it go.
Yeah.
So,
and then they better hire you.
They better hire me. Yeah, absolutely.
They owe you one.
One last question before we kind of take it out here. Matt, if you're listening, what if at some point Matt did return to Christine or tell another Christine tale? Do you think you guys would be back in?
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're down for it, but if it fit Matt's vision.
Yeah.
I guess are there ideas from Devil's Legacy
that we're always thinking
want to develop,
or
things that have come up over the last 30 years? You're like, oh man, what about this idea?
About it, like I think we both sort of like had, oh, what if this or what if that, but not to the point where we've ever committed real time, because it's not our character. So I think there have been things I wouldn't even want to bring up here in this forum, but that would be an interesting way to bring her back. And I know you guys were talking about, like, there were sort of unanswered questions about certain aspects of the story world. And what's interesting to that point, and I think the COP, for instance, in their whole world, and that was just going back to that for a second, it was just funny because I was going, oh my gosh, if these, I mean, I don't know, Matt might have had, so I think it was just happening organically, because I think we just put that in there. I think we just put in, I don't know, Yak, I don't want to. Maybe Matt had a whole thing with the cop that the COP, I don't remember. I just thought we just put COP on a guy's back, and then he just saw it and went and kind of built off of that. And that to me is awesome, because that was a part of the story that maybe wasn't fully, intended, but it
I don't remember. Yeah,
it became a part of it.
It sort of spurred. I know the one thing we did kind of randomly put in was Wiggins' eye thing. That was something we just kind of were like, oh, let's make this guy, he's just been in the shadows, but when he comes out of the shadows, let's have him look weird or something off about him, that you're like, what the hell? So when he finally comes, he's not just a deadbeat detective or something, but he's actually got this cybernetic eye. But then Matt turned it into a lie detector, and
Yeah, he called him like Chrome Eye or whatever.
and then he started calling him Chrome Eye.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
that's so
oh,
cool.
that was a beautiful collaboration with Matt that I remember going, oh, that's kind of fun how that just happened in this neat way. And hopefully it fed that the COP world. Yeah. So that obviously the COP thing you could totally go into, because it is the bigger kind of, you know, whatever draconian force secret police thing. That's always good to, you know, deep dive into. But there's, you know, as far as Christine goes, yeah, I mean, she's sort of, we only got to see this one very hyperbolic sort of part of her life that was ultimately ended in tragedy. Yeah. But there's so much who, you know, who is that person? Who was that person? And how did maybe Grendel manifest itself in her, maybe at different points in her life that could be cool short stories, or who knows. But she is a great character, very strong character.
And the fact that it does go through all these different iterations and characters, it seems like, I mean, you know, it could be anything. I mean, that universe is so open that Matt's created, which is cool. So,
and her whole life was affected by it too, being that her mother was this, and the visits to the. So I mean, there's gotta be times she made her own mask.
Right. Like teenage Christine. I mean, what was that like?
Right. She was still Grendelin, but at that point, there was still Grendel in her life. Did she make a mask at one point on her own? You know, and even just for like Halloween.
Right.
Yeah, in art class. Like, I mean,
Well, that's the great thing about these characters, like saying, you know, kind of referencing the Close Encounters with the, you know, with the potatoes and the mountain and I mean, that whole idea of something that's, you know, in your DNA or in your psyche, and you know, and we can kind of testify to that a little bit, because I mean, we've had artists in our entire family for generations, and you know, we might have been given a little bit of an advantage, I don't know, because there was just this sort of art running through, but you can't ever explain it. It's not something that's a conscious thing. It's just in there, and it finds a way out. It finds a way to express itself, and not always in the same way. But I think there's creativity throughout everyone's lineage in some form or another. And so I think we're all artists, you know, in a way. We all have that in us. So it's whether, you know, to different degrees, but do we cultivate that? Do we compartmentalize it? You know, how do we express it? And I think that that's something that it'd be nice to see as a culture and society encouraging that. And I think we are seeing it in terms of how, you know, I mean, obviously commerce driven, you know, vehicles have made becoming an artist less taboo than it was when we were starting out. But I think that just in general, just the daily onslaught of creative and just a constant, you know, quality content and material and art that's happening simultaneously, like, you know, on Instagram, it's just overwhelming. So the bar is high, you know, and in comics too. I mean, it's like, geez, so much incredible artwork, and the colorists and the illustration level. But you know, but I always try to like encourage people that don't have all those skill sets, because it's like, it's about your voice, you know, and your voice is going to speak to someone, and they're not going to be looking at that perfect, or, you know, perfect in quotes line, because something else is perfect to them, because it connects. And so that's another thing too, in the midst of all the noise, in the midst of all the you know, high quality, you know, incredible art that's coming at us, that you continue to, you know, cultivate your voice, because that's really what's gonna, you know, break through.
Absolutely.
Eli, I fucking love this guy.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I agree.
Really,
Thank you guys so
well
much.
said.
You bet.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
Thank you.
Can I ask about the analog airbrush coloring? Do you guys know how that was done?
Josh, you want to take that?
Thank you so much.
Which one in particular? Or just
there's so many different effects that just like show up here and there. There's like, I guess on the splash with the Argent Lightning.
In the final
anytime like there's like the lightning effects, there's one,
Oh,
right? Like
well,
how is that
yeah,
done?
that's a Tom Vincent question. Yeah, some of those, we dabbled in the coloring here and there, and I was, you guys mentioned it, and I was like, did we color the graphic novel? And I think what happened was we'd had some issues with color choices here and there, but I don't think we recolored that whole graphic novel. But really, Tom Vincent, some of those incredible techniques that are like pre-Photoshop. I mean, we colored some of Ginger Fox, and they gave us these grids. They were called like K-tones, and they were a new form of coloring that they were doing at the time that made for these more muted tones. That Marvel was very RGB, and comics up to that point. So just to mass produce them. So that when these indie comics were happening, there was suddenly this different print, more options, just a broader palette, but they had more blacks in them. I get grays in them. So you had these muted, softer tones.
Subtler tones, yeah.
Yeah. So that was, and we were but so many codes. We were like, let's color this. We were like, oh my God, this is crazy. So the only thing we could really speak to are the covers that we colored, which they were still kind of, it was some of the, the Prisma pencil, I think one of you guys called that. And then the airbrush, which we'd been doing quite a bit of in our own, graphic work and stuff. We'd been doing illustrations and getting pretty excited about the airbrush. I think we had a teacher that showed us that, and the results were so spectacular. So we had a little bit of insight into airbrushing when we started Grendel.
Yeah. Like that cover, I think, of number 12, it's probably got a mix of airbrush. Those were done at that particular time. What they were doing was they would put the line art on a piece of clear acetate, and then they would kind of photo flash onto a drawing board the blue line of that, and so then you would kind of peel back the black and white acetate drawing and color off of the blue line. So it was just this whole color layer. And so on that, we were doing the, cutting frisket, doing some airbrush here and there, doing the color pencil. And then what we decided to do on a few of those things was we realized, oh, well, gosh, this piece of acetate is like an animation cell. So let's flip it over. And I think, if I recall, all of the glowing yellow windows of that building were actually painted with paint or cell animation onto the back of the acetate sheet where the windows were. Then you kind of drop that down, and they all had that very punchy kind of light.
Oh, so that's on the ink layer. Oh,
that's on the ink layer.
That's really cool.
Painted onto it. Yeah.
I think we did that a few places.
Yeah.
That's so
but
cool.
That one was prominently, but I think we did that on maybe number 9. I know we did it number 9 with the strings that are attached to Riley. All the
those
ropes.
are all done on the back of the acetate.
It gave a real clean, flat look against these sort of more textured elements, and it's it made it punchy, like Jacob said.
Mystery solved.
Mystery solved.
Awesome. That's so cool.
So you said all those links before, but you have also panderbrothers.com. What about social media, other places that people can find you, follow you? And
at Pander Bros for Instagram.
And then our Facebook is actually Facebook.com/Pander Brothers, all spelled out, but our Instagram is at Pander Bros, BROS.
Okay.
And we have Fuse Comics.
FuseComics.com.
And then we do have individual Instagram accounts as well. I'm at Arnold Pander. Jacob is at Pander Vision. And those are a little bit more our kind of, personal work. So we keep the comic books and the film and the media projects on at Pander Bros. And then if you want to see some of our, I'm more of my fine art work or Jacob's photography, and then our personal accounts.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you guys so much. It's really been such a pleasure to go through this work with you. And
Oh.
thanks again for connecting with us on Instagram and answering questions throughout the reading. And it was amazing.
Yeah, it's been great. Well, thank you guys for revisiting the whole project and going so deep, doing the deep dive. It was really cool. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
much appreciation.
A lot of fun.
Inspired words. It was great to read it.
Well, thanks for taking
guys.
the time.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you so much. Until next time,
Yeah.
Vivat Grendel and keep on Grendelin'.